Alright, so the RTX 50 series, Nvidia finally announced it at CES 2025, and I gotta say the information they dropped on us sent waves across the PC hardware and gaming industry. There's a lot we have to talk about, a lot of cool new tech that they showed off, performance figures, pricing, and availability. I can see a lot of people going head over heels for these cards. To that, I'm gonna say just hold on, pump the brakes a bit. Let's discuss that in this video.
Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video.
Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. So Captain Nvidia, aka Leather Jacket Man, I gotta say that's a nice jacket. Jensen Huang dropped the highly anticipated RTX 50 series at CES 2025, and to my surprise, there were a number of cool things Nvidia showed off. Along with that, the reception I've seen from the PC gaming and hardware crowd has been overall positive, so much so that I've seen people asking how they can go ahead and pre-order the 50 series, and some even saying that the RTX 5090 is an absolute bargain. And to that, I'm gonna say just hold on, don't be in such a rush to surrender your credit cards to Nvidia. Honestly, I feel like if Nvidia were to host a Squid Game and the prize was an RTX 5090, I would bet you there would be gamers willing to participate and go through all 6 games, no matter the obstacles, just to get their hands on one. But I digress. Now, how much of the RTX 50 series magic will hold up still remains to be seen. We'll have to wait until the cards are in the hands of reviewers. I will definitely try my best to get my hands on a 5090, as I've got a 4090 right here in my test bench, and I would love to do a whole bunch of testing and stuff for the channel and for myself, for my curiosity. But the takeaway I had from this is that Nvidia and Jensen are absolute geniuses when it comes to their sales pitch. The amount of people that I've seen out there that truly believe that the RTX 5070 will offer them 4090 levels of performance is quite eye-opening. But perhaps their eyes have indeed been opened. Just open through a neural network, eh? Don't worry, we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But let's jump into this, and firstly, what I wanted to talk about was the pricing. From the bottom, we can see that the RTX 5070 is priced at $550 MSRP, the 5070 Ti is $750, and the 5080 is at $1,000. And then we finally have the RTX 5090 at $2,000. This is all USD, by the way. Honestly, these prices are definitely better than I had initially anticipated, especially in the lower end. I guess this is why AMD chickened out and didn't bother to even talk about the RX 9000 at their keynote, because they would have been absolutely embarrassed. Now, every model except the 5090 has basically cheaper pricing than the vanilla RTX 40 series, which I guess is a good thing. Going into this, and with how much negative reception there already was surrounding the RTX 40 series, this is a good move on Nvidia's part, and it definitely seems to be working, as there were many rumors and a lot of speculation over these past few months that across the board there would be price hikes, that we would be seeing a $1,600 RTX 5080, and that the 5070 Ti would be $1,000, and the 5070 would be like $800, but thankfully, all of that turned out to be false. One of the biggest reasons why people have been so happy with these prices, and this goes back to what I said about Nvidia really doing marketing well, is because of the way Nvidia introduced the series. He didn't start off with the entire family. He showed the last generation of flagship first and reminded everyone about its $1,600 price tag, and apparently how we all have $10,000 gaming stations at home.
This is RTX 4090. I know many of you have one. I know it. Look, it's $1,599. It is one of the best investments you could possibly make. You bring it home to your $10,000 PC entertainment command center. Isn't that right? Don't tell me that's not true. Don't be ashamed.
Kind of a weird, out-of-touch thing to say, but that's besides the point. He showed the 4090 and then immediately followed up with the 5070, claiming it offers the same performance at $549.
And now for $1,500 and $1,599, you get to upgrade that and turbocharge the living daylights out of it. Well, now with the Blackwell family, RTX 5070, 4090 performance at $549. Impossible without artificial intelligence. Impossible without the 4 tops. Impossible without artificial intelligence.
Using a marketing strategy like this was basically a move they used in the past with the GTX 1070, like how it matched the Titan X according to Nvidia, or how the 3070 equals 2080 Ti. They know that their 70 class is a very popular segment where a huge chunk of their user base resides in, so this way they're garnering the attention of a lot of people by doing this. And then by setting this foundation that the lowest card announced so far matches the previous generation flagship, it gets people to start thinking, oh my god, that must mean that the 5080 at $1,000 is gonna smash the 4090 and that the 5090 will be over double the performance of the 4090 as Nvidia claims. I've already seen a lot of people parroting this. However, this is mostly bullshit, and those claims by Nvidia are only valid under certain conditions. Nvidia has posted the specifications of all these new graphics cards on their website, and I'll have links to everything down below, but what I wanted to use was this table that was shared by Harukaze on Twitter. I believe this table is from Quasar Zone. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's a Korean tech site, but it lays out everything much better and has more specs that Nvidia omitted on their site. So it gives you guys much better insight. We're not going to go over everything because a lot of these specs turned out to be the same as what we had gone over in the previous leaks. Now, if we look at the RTX 5070, it has 6,144 CUDA cores. That's only 4% more than an RTX 4070. It doesn't even have more shaders than an RTX 4070 Super. It still only gets 12 gigabytes of VRAM. It does, however, also have 33% more memory bandwidth, and it is rated at 50 watts higher for its TGP. The 4090 has 167% more shaders than a 5070 and 50% more memory bandwidth. Even the all-new flagship RTX 5090 has 33% more shaders than a 4090, but it does have 78% more memory bandwidth and 32 gigabytes of G7 memory. But if you look at the overall specs, they turned out exactly as how we saw from the leaks, and they're not a substantial upgrade over the previous generation 40 series, with really the 5090 kind of being an exception to that point. With that said, this is why many folks aren't complaining too much about pricing, because even though the specs on paper aren't spectacular, at least the prices didn't really jump, so I guess in this economy that's a good thing. So how exactly can an RTX 5070 offer 4090 performance? Why did Nvidia claim this? Well, the answer to that is quite simple, through the magic of DLSS4. Well, it's not really magic. DLSS4 is an evolution of DLSS3. DLSS3 introduced frame generation, where in between two frames, there was an artificially generated frame using data on screen and motion vectors, but now with DLSS4, you're able to generate up to 3 more frames using AI deep learning algorithms. So you could essentially quadruple your FPS using DLSS4. This is how Nvidia are able to make these claims, where an RTX 5070 will offer you 4090 performance at just $549. This is not a new concept though. This has been around for a while. There's programs like lossless scaling that lets you generate 3x or 4x frame gen on almost any GPU, and I remember when I saw Intel's benchmarks for their frame gen tech for Battlemage and they compared it to the 4060, they were getting a substantially larger boost, so perhaps Intel is already doing something like 3x frame gen on their own cards. So Nvidia has posted a bunch of demos on their website, and we'll take a look at some of their footage here. Basically, you can see how they're showing a bunch of games running at 4K native, getting around 60 FPS or below, and then once they turn on DLSS4 with multi-frame generation, the FPS number just skyrockets. We're seeing over 4x the increase, which at a first glance just seems insane. I do want to point out though that the reason why the jump looks so large there is because it's being combined with an upscaler as well. DLSS upscaling already boosted, quote unquote boosted performance, as you'd be downscaling the internal resolution and then upscaling using an AI algorithm. But the thing you have to keep in mind here is that you're not really improving performance using frame generation or MFG. Frame generation should be looked at as a frame smoothing technology, not an actual performance boosting technology. You're basically hallucinating more frames based on the content and data on screen. That gives the player a perception that, hey, their game is running faster and smoother. If you go over each of the models and look at their product pages separately, you'll see that Nvidia has posted some bar charts showcasing performance between the 50 series and the last generation 40 series. And the information here gives us some further insight on the true performance advancements of the RTX 50 series. When we look at the RTX 5070, the 4090 capable GPU according to Nvidia, we can see how in games like Cyberpunk 2077, Alan Wake 2, Black Myth, Wukong, at 1440p, we can see there's a 2x, if not higher performance increase over the previous generation. Looks great, right? But at the bottom, you'll see how they have some further information on how the test systems were set up. So both GPUs are using upscaling, both are using ray reconstruction. However, the 40 series GPU is using just regular old frame generation, whereas the 5070 is using multi-frame generation on 4X mode. Hence, there's such a large difference in those titles. Now, what about a Plague Tale Requiem in Far Cry 6? What's going on there? Why is the performance difference not as big? So a Plague Tale Requiem doesn't support the DLSS4 MFG yet. I think it will be in the in the future. So they tested the two cards using regular frame generation plus DLS, and you'll see the difference isn't as large. There's no actual FPS numbers given, just relative performance, and from what I can tell, given the scale of the graph, it appears to be about 35 to 40% faster than the 5070. Then in Far Cry 6, which supports ray tracing, but none of the Nvidia DLSS stuff and FrameGen tech, we can see how the 5070 is like 20% better. Someone on Reddit actually posted these graphs with some percentages laid on top based on pixel counting, so I guess that's better than nothing. Now, typically, I've seen that when it comes to raster, upscaling, and ray tracing performance differences between the Nvidia generations, they seem to be relatively close. Like if you go back and take a look at Tech PowerUp's 4070 review, you'll see how it's about 27% faster than the 3070 at 1440p, and then in their ray tracing section of the review, it's about 33% faster. Granted, if the 3070 had 12 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 8, I think the difference in ray tracing would have been much more closer. So if we take that into consideration, then that tells me that the 5070's true performance difference, so just pure raster, no upscaling or frame gen shenanigans involved, then we're looking at around a 20% jump gen on gen, maybe 30% at best, which, you know, if it's about the same price as the outgoing model, then I guess it's okay at best. So what about the other cards then? So for the 5070 Ti, we can see the same thing as what they showed for the 5070. Crazy high differences in Cyberpunk, Black Myth, and Alan Wake because of DLSS4 multi-frame gen, but in Far Cry 6, the performance difference looks to be about 40% or 35%, so a bit larger than the 5070, but remember, Nvidia aren't comparing these models to the super models, they're using just regular vanilla 40 series, so do keep that in mind. If the super models were brought in, the performance advantages would be even more diminished. Then for the 5080, we see the same thing. This card looks like it'll be about 30% faster than the 4080, which means it'll actually end up trading blows with the 4090 in some games, which, you know, at $1,000, it wouldn't be too bad, I guess. And I can see a lot of people who've been waiting for 4090 performance at a cheaper price, they will be satisfied with this card. Then with the 5090 versus the 4090, we can see that the performance difference in Far Cry 6 seems like it's about 30% to me. But keep in mind, guys, the power has also increased quite dramatically over the 4090, almost 30%. So if it's 30% faster, but uses almost 30% more performance and also costs like 25 to 30% more depending on the model, is that really a win? And this doesn't just apply to the 5090, but this will also apply to other models. Now with DLSS4 and MFG, you can see how the 5090 is able to pump out over double the frames versus the 4090. But overall, across the SKUs, it looks like gen on gen, we're probably going to be getting around 30% better raster performance, but we won't know for sure until the cards are actually tested. Nvidia also showed some demos between the two GPUs, and you'll see how in Cyberpunk 2077, the 5090 is dominating the 4090, providing over double the frames with DLSS4. Now, something that caught my eye, which gives us more information on the 5090's true performance, is that they have a video showing the difference of Cyberpunk 2077 RT Overdrive native versus DLSS4, and in this demo, they used the 5090. So at 4K native in Cyberpunk using RT Overdrive or path tracing, the 5090 is only getting like 28 FPS, a $2,000 GPU. Now, that just goes to show you how computationally heavy real-time path tracing is. I remember I tested this when it came out on my 4090 and I was getting like 20 FPS. So that's like a 40% difference gen on gen with path tracing involved. And I thought with Blackwell, what Nvidia would do for its big appeal would be that they would finally have the hardware that could do real-time path tracing natively at substantially higher FPS or playable FPS compared to Ada Lovelace, but instead the answer we got was yes, but through AI. Now listen, this whole time I might have been coming off as somewhat of a hater, or that if I can't play games natively, then I don't want to play them at all, and I don't want you guys to misunderstand me. I've used DLSS upscaling plenty of times in a lot of games to help boost performance. I have also utilized frame generation in a lot of single-player title games. I'm not someone who's opposed to using these technologies. I got to enjoy playing Hitman 3 completely maxed out with ray tracing using frame generation. I think a game like that's slow pace, it works out fine. A game like Microsoft Flight Simulator is, I think, a perfect candidate for frame generation. And back when Cyberpunk 2077 didn't support FSR frame gen natively, I used a mod to convert or swap Nvidia's frame gen with FSR and got to enjoy playing Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty on my personal system, which has a 3090 and 14900K using path tracing. And the experience was very playable and the latency wasn't bad at all. Sure, there were some noticeable issues with it, but after a while, I just became so fixated on actually playing the game that I just kind of forgot about that or learned to live with the issues. When I was playing Black Myth Wukong, I utilized frame generation in conjunction with path tracing on my 4090 on my 4K OLED, and the experience was phenomenal. That was a fast-paced action game, and you would think that the input lag would be detrimental to one's experience, but I had no issues playing the game like that start to finish. I think the gripe people have had with having so much frame gen and upscaling shoved in our faces over these past few years is that, sure, it's great in alleviating poor performance or compensating for an FPS hit when using ray tracing, but the image stability isn't perfect. You have to deal with shimmering, noise, weird artifacting, and it can also be off-putting to the experience. Nvidia aren't dumb. They aren't just going to push a 4x frame gen mode, which could further compound those issues and call it a day. So the older DLSS model used CNN or convolutional neural networks, generating new pixels by analyzing localized context and tracking changes in those regions over successive frames. It was horrendous at first, but over time it got better, but it still had some glaring issues. Their new model uses a vision transformer, enabling self-attention operations to evaluate the relative importance of each pixel across the entire frame and over multiple frames, employing double the parameters of the CNN model to achieve a deeper understanding of scenes. The new model generates pixels that offer greater stability, reduced ghosting, higher detail in motion, and smoother edges in a scene. We see it in action compared to the old CNN model in some of their demos, and you can see that in those areas of the games where shimmering or weird artifacting would be present, that is no longer the case. It's very, very reduced, if not at all. This would be especially noticeable for fast-moving objects, and as you guys can see from that fan, you see how much more stable the image quality is. Digital Foundry made a video on their channel where they got an exclusive hands-on with the 5080 and did a bit more testing with it. The video wasn't a full deep dive or anything because they mentioned they didn't have the card for too long and were using a pre-production sample with like beta drivers, but they did test it in Cyberpunk 2077, and you'll see just how much more improved and stable the image is using this newer transformer model.
Ghosting, as there's little to no information given to the algorithm on how to reconstruct this element, which makes the transformer model to the right somewhat surprising, as the ghosting is basically gone. The same here as we take a look at these NPCs at the table and around it. Exhibit smearing artifacts after some time when using DLSS. Here, matched animation shows that's gone with the transformer model. We can't synchronize the background NPCs for obvious reasons. The behavior is somewhat random, but the ghosting is even more pronounced there on the left.
This was a pretty big gripe that a lot of people had with the old DLSS model and why they wrote it off. Yeah, like it looks decent when you're standing still, but as soon as there's motion involved, you get blurriness or artifacting. Of course, more further testing is required, and I would like to see how this would look during a really fast-paced game like Black Ops 6, though I really wouldn't recommend using any frame gen tech for multiplayer games. Just lower your settings and call it a day. You'll have a much better experience. But if Nvidia has managed to fix these problems with DLSS and make the image resemble more closely to native during motion, then I think this will convince a lot more people to get on board with the tech. Another gripe a lot of people had with frame generation was the input lag. This was something I have felt personally as well using frame generation, and the key to minimizing it is to use it at a minimum of 60 FPS. If your average FPS is below 60 FPS, then you're going to have some very noticeable input delay. It's just not going to feel natural at all, and it'll really start to throw you off. And I don't think that their new Reflex 2 is going to fully solve that, though I could be wrong, because from a lot of these demos that we're seeing, you can see how using native settings, the FPS is at like 28 or 30, something, abysmal. And then all of a sudden we've jumped to like 200 FPS. So maybe with Reflex 2, they have really solved that input lag problem where it feels just as close to native. The good news is that these updated DLSS models, minus the new frame gen stuff, will be available on older RTX graphics cards. So if you've got an RTX 2060 or a 2070 or 3080, then you can enjoy the new DLSS4 transformer models and Reflex 2. So when you put it all together, upscaling, frame generation, neural texture processing, and more, it becomes clear that these technologies are a byproduct of stagnation and hardware performance. We've hit a point where silicon is reaching its physical limits. Shrinking nodes further is becoming increasingly expensive, and wafer costs are skyrocketing. This means we're getting less hardware improvement for our money. Nvidia's answer? shift the focus to AI-powered technologies that create the perception of massive performance leaps, even if the actual hardware advancements are minimal. It's a clever strategy that lets them maintain high profit margins while keeping consumers reasonably satisfied. Now, I remember reading an interview with Jensen Huang where he emphasized that graphics can't evolve much further without AI. He talked about how AI allows Nvidia to take small datasets and hallucinate the rest, leveraging vast amount of model training to push visuals to new heights. This isn't just a neat trick, it's the backbone of their future strategy. Nvidia isn't just selling GPUs anymore, they're selling the promise of cutting-edge AI integration to drive graphical innovation. For instance, DLSS4's multi-frame generation is a prime example of this philosophy in action. While it might sound revolutionary, it's more of a stopgap designed to smooth out performance rather than genuinely boost it. And let's not forget, these technologies don't come without trade-offs. They rely heavily on AI's ability to predict and reconstruct frames, but they also introduce potential artifacts, shimmering, and input latency, which can impact the user's experience. Nvidia is refining these issues, but it's clear that the reliance on AI is both a necessity and a gamble at the same time. It's a double-edged sword. One of the more intriguing aspects of the RTX 50 series announcements is the way Nvidia frames these advancements. By emphasizing features like DLSS4 and multi-frame generation, they've created a narrative where AI is the savior of gaming performance. However, the real story might be that the underlying hardware improvements, though meaningful, aren't as dramatic as the marketing suggests. This pivot to AI-first solutions underscores how much Nvidia is banking on the software to outpace the diminishing returns of hardware and silicon innovation. Looking at the bigger picture, this AI-driven future raises questions about the direction of PC gaming. Are we heading towards a landscape where native performance takes a backseat to AI-enhanced visuals? And as consumers, are we okay with paying premium prices for solutions that prioritize perception over raw performance? These are debates that Nvidia's RTX 50 series sparked, and they're ones that we'll need to wrestle with as we move forward. And time will tell and give us the answer. But that essentially covers what I wanted to talk about for my initial impressions on the RTX 50 series. I think in terms of availability, the 5090 and 5080 are supposed to be launching on January 30th, and then they haven't given an exact date for the 5070 series, but that's supposed to be in February, and then I take it sometime in March where you are going to see the 5060 series. Is it going to be a success, and will the cards sell out day one? I believe so. Over these past few months, I've always kept on asking the question, if we're not seeing a large leap in raw performance, Nvidia is going to have to come out with something substantial for DLSS4, and will it be enough? Well, given the reception I've seen around it and the updates to complement it and deliver a complete package, I think they've achieved that. The 5090 especially will be highly sought after because if it's not gamers, there will be people buying it to train AI for workstation purposes. That's actually why people are calling this card a bargain, because Nvidia's professional series GPUs actually cost way more than that. So for those folks, $2,000 is actually peanuts given the grand scheme of things and the specifications for this graphics card. Aside from that, and I guess speaking about the 5090, I briefly wanted to touch upon the design of the Founders Edition 5090. Nvidia have to be absolutely commended here. They were able to cram all those components on such a tiny PCB, and what's more impressive is despite the massive 575 watt TGP, the reference 5090 is a 2-slot card and is SFF or small form factor ready, making it the smallest 5090 on the market, and that alone is going to make it highly sought after. But I also look forward to seeing what creative models the AIBs put out. Alrighty guys, so this video became much longer than I had initially anticipated, so we'll call it there and we'll be touching base in the next video.
If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.